to tragedy as to philosophy. Now, why would he be expressing that kind of analogy, and what's so significant about that? Well, here's another problem. Very curious problem. If you look up comedy in an index on Carl Jung's works, you won't find any reference to comedy. If you look up the references to Manly Hall and many a philosopher, you won't find any references to comedy. Why did the Greeks generate these two things? They also generated this. Is there some interconnection between comedy, tragedy, and philosophy, which the Greeks were able to see and represent with great clarity? And furthermore, is it possible that Socrates, playing the role that he's playing in this curious dialogues of Plato called the Symposium, does that represent the whole problem of the relationship between comedy, tragedy, and philosophy? Well, if so, how are we going to express it? How are we going to explore it? Well, there are many people who are into this curious game of the spiritual evolution of man, East and West. And they don't deal with comic, the tragic. They ignore it. It's not relevant. Or if it is relevant, then why don't they deal with it? Or don't they see it? If Plato is saying that they're interrelated, then if they don't really grasp one, they don't grasp the other. For the same man ought to understand how to compose comedy, tragedy, and philosophy. And he who has skill as a philosopher, should he also have skill for writing tragedies and comedies? Now that would be an irony, would it not? Liquor. Let's look at it in another way. In the Greek world, those who designed the comedies, as you know, they performed between the second and the third drama in a trilogy, sometimes called satyr plays. That's where we get the idea of comic relief. So if you went to see 3 plays in the evening, between the second and the third, they'd slip in a comedy. The comedies were always surprises. For many, many years, no record was made of them. They put them on, everyone laughed, had a good time with them, and they passed into oblivion. They didn't keep records of them. They didn't keep records of them until very late. Furthermore, they weren't giving prizes for comedies, but they gave prizes for tragedies until very late. Now, what is it about a comedy? Look here, maybe we can set up a little interesting table. And then, if we can read something out of Plato's Symposium in respect to Aristophanes and Agathon and Socrates, we may be able to pull something together. Now, let's go one more step. Comedy for the Greeks was a time to let go. That's when they got rid of all their inhibitions, and they had a good time doing it. Boisterous satyr plays. Therefore, they always made fun of, made a comedy out of sexuality. Authorities. And ideally, they'd love to relate them together. A satyr play is a sexual farce. Uninhibited sexual freedom on stage in public was a satyr play, and that was the center part of a comedy in those days. It's really worth noting that if you go downstairs to our bookstore here or a library, and you work your way through all of the shelves and open them up, books on the shelves, and look up comedy, there are going to be very few books on comedy. There are going to be very few people who are going to deal with comedy. Well, therefore, it seems curious that we want to say they're related, especially this way. So let's try it and see what we can come up with. First, would you agree that they all deal with the same problem? They all deal because sexuality is just a physical expression of love. Comedy deals with sexuality, love. Tragedy invariably has to deal with problems of love. Philosophy, its very name, deals with problems of love. Wow. Suppose then we take a look at a comic figure. Now, Aristophanes had Socrates in his play The Clouds, suspended from the heavens in a basket. And he put him up there because he was close to heaven. And therefore he made a comic figure out of him. What is it about making a comic figure about the highest authorities, love and sexuality? Well, let us take the central notion first. Think of any comic, any comedy at all. Would you agree they have a certain appearance, necessary appearance? They have a certain style. They enter into all kinds of conflict situations. And when they do that, they always think they know. They believe they know. They never question what they know. Never questioned. And because they never question, they believe that they know, they get in the most amazing situations, which they never solve, but they stumble their way through it. The solutions to every comic story cannot be the result of the comic waking up and dealing directly with a puzzling situation he created through his own ignorance. So then, the interesting thing about a comedy is that he doesn't know it, but we in the audience know. We are playing a major role in the comedy. We're the audience. We know. We're in on it. We can laugh at him or her. The comic figure, he believes he knows. We know he doesn't know. And therefore we can laugh at his ignorance. The comic figure, therefore, always functions on two levels. That is to say, he is always ignorant, and he always has a belief, and the belief that he has, or she has, is that they really know. So they're in two realms, ignorance and belief. Now, the situations they get into, because they believe they know, but they are in truth ignorant,